Hi, good evening and good morning, everyone. First, thank you again for your time and definitely to listen to some of my experience in this space. Before we start, one second. We have a little bit of technical.
Oh no, you're good. They can't see it. I can fix it. And
cool.
It's gone. Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
All right, thanks everyone. Apologies, had some minor technical difficulty, but again, really appreciate everyone's time and here to listen to some of my experience in this space. So my name is Jeff. I'm a senior PM at Microsoft, working on a product called Workplace Analytics. What we do is, if you think about Office and all the signals that you have around documents, emails, calendars, our job is really to enable that kind of an analytics analysis to kind of help drive productivity challenges at companies. So if you think about our core use cases, mom and dad are working really late, always in a lot of meetings. What we want to do is apply analytics so they can get home to dinner at a reasonable time. So that's kind of what I've been working on at Microsoft. And today I'll describe sort of my journey all the way from my kind of high school days in data and analytics, all the way to where I am at Microsoft. So just some quick background. I grew up in Texas. I went to the University of Texas. I studied electrical engineering as an undergrad, and a few years later, I went back and got my MBA. Also at UT. So hook 'em horns. Grew up in Texas, and that's where I'm from. I've had the pleasure to work at startups, large tech companies, and also in consulting. And I'm, again, as mentioned, currently working on workplace analytics at Microsoft. So just a few things, kind of the positions I've had. When I was in college, I was a software engineering contractor for AMD, really making test software, testing, AMD processors in their facilities in Malaysia and Singapore. So I did that while I was in college, pursuing my bachelor's in engineering. From about 2007 to 2010, I ran my own import-export business. Buying and selling metals, and did that for about 3 years, right about, a little bit after the commodities crashed during the recession. So went back and became a data analyst and also data engineer at a company called Bazaar Voice between 2010 and 2012. Bazaar Voice powers ratings and reviews for almost every internet retailer basically in the world at this point. So I did a lot of things around social analytics, ratings and reviews, conversions on websites and things like that. From about 2012 to 2015, I was a senior consultant at Infosys and then at Deloitte, specializing in information management, BI, data science, anything around data, from the warehousing side all the way to data science. That's the kind of projects I worked on. I left Deloitte and joined a company called Volumetrics as their director of analytics, splitting time between helping our customers understand this data, but also building a lot of our internal analytics and platform that we use to assess all the mail and meeting data. We were acquired by Microsoft, and the last couple of years I've been spending my time building basically our product and all of our internal tools as part of the Microsoft stack. So that's a little bit about my background and my sort of journey to where I am today. So, quick recap: was a software engineer, has been a data analyst, helped companies understand analytics and data and statistics, and of course, now building these products in this space. So just to give kind of high level my consulting experience, these are the main verticals I've always specialized in. Financial services, definitely, technology and software, packaged good, and just a couple other companies that don't really fit into these. What's interesting about these verticals, and if you think about it from the analytics perspective, the data and analytics are very, very different in these verticals. For example, in financial services, most financial services companies are highly regulated. Data and analytics are very tightly controlled, and you tend to see more data silos. In technology companies, and definitely in the case of Microsoft, IT tends to be a larger, part of the business. They're usually dogfooding their own products, and there's tons of tools, tons of tech, just by the nature of their industry.
Quick question for you, and this is Mike here to ask some questions. One is, what does dogfooding mean for that product?
Gotcha. So to clear about for dogfooding, if you work in a software company, especially one like Microsoft that offers products that most people use every day, like Exchange or Outlook or Word or Excel, usually you're using the bleeding edge version of the product. So for example, at Microsoft, we use the latest versions that aren't available in the public of every software. Now, sometimes that's great because the engineering teams are learning what are the problems. They're teasing out the bugs before it goes public. On the flip side, you have to have buggy software. So that's what I mean by dog fooding. And then if you think about packaged good, most packaged good companies have a very, very strong culture of analytics. If you think about the Procter & Gamble's, the Clorox's, these big consumer packaged companies have to have analytics, and that's how they compete. If you think about pricing, media, and marketing, if they don't compete using data and these highly sophisticated algorithms, they will not be able to survive. So you tend to see very, very strong analytics and packaged companies. And then lastly, most companies suffer from this, I like to call managing a business in Excel. Every company has so much data sitting in Bob's Excel file on his computer that sometimes it's running very, very mission critical things. So lots of data all over the place. Sometimes it's centralized, but just data is just sitting on people's desktops sometimes. So again, these are just general observations, and they're really highly determined on how mature these companies are, ranging from their data infrastructure, their data warehouses, their policies, all the way to or how sophisticated are their statisticians and data scientists.
So just a quick break from the audience here, relevant questions to this first section. One person is asking, and you might speak more to this in the greater career path, but you've jumped from, at the beginning, being more software engineering focused to now getting to a project manager. So they said the exact question is, what are the key skills you need to improve or gain if we transition from software engineering to more project manager?
That's a great question. And in my consulting, I think if I want to take a step back, and when I went from sort of being very technical, doing software or doing analytics or data engineering work and doing more into managing these projects, I would say the number one most key is communication and presentation. Consulting for me, and again, everyone has different paths. Some people get thrown into a project management role. Some people, kind of take the lead and, drive that in their internal teams, even if it's as an engineering lead. But it really comes down to communication. What happens is that moving from individual contributor, writing code, to thinking broadly requires working with tons of different stakeholders. Mm-hmm. And it's not just understanding the requirements, as most software engineering functions do. You get a requirement from the customer, you kind of ask a few clarifying questions, and you go do it. When you go to a project manager, not only do you have to do that, you also have to understand the motivation. What are the other dependencies you have? If you're building a service and you have other dependent services, what do their roadmaps look like? But it all comes down to just being able to communicate very effectively. And so that's I would say the biggest thing you have to build to make that jump.
And if I think of practical, a lot of students will say, it's good to know the big picture, but what's the practical step? Mm-hmm. One thing is if you go back a slide to all the companies you worked with.
Yes.
So a benefit. So full disclosure, I also worked at Deloitte, and so I did consulting. So if I can make a pitch as consulting as an example, one reason it's really nice is it forces you a little outside your comfort zone very quickly. So I just graduated school and I was pushed to manage clients. And just by going through a cycle and making some small mistakes, right? Okay, I thought I knew the right requirements for this design, but I got it a little wrong. The next time you do requirements, you're not going to make that mistake. So all of these little soft skills, you kind of just have to put yourself out of your comfort zone and do projects where you work with the customer. If you're still a student, I'd say, do student leadership positions. If you have a student organization, like CSSA is a really popular organization for Chinese students in the US, take initiative to join those organizations and run events. Anything that requires people management, communications management, that's a big part of the project manager skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just add one note to that before we move on. Communication is definitely, I think the number one. Sometimes if you don't have the opportunity to, lead a student group, everyone gets really busy. One really easy tactical thing you could do is think about your classes, think about small projects, think about even just, doing your taxes and treating that as a project. So every project has some nuts and bolts that are going to be the same for every project. You have to figure out a plan. What is it you're trying to achieve? And then the execution. If you treat your classes this way and use that kind of framework, that can also help build some of these, comfort, managing projects and some of the ambiguity.
Yep. We can do this one quick, but what is a data silo?
Data silo. So if you think about, let's do an example. You have marketing. In marketing, they'll have data around pricing, what customers are buying, all the focus group and survey stuff. And then you have, let's say, HR. HR has information about, their employees, their headcounts, where they came from and so forth. What I mean by silo is all the data is from marketing, sits in marketing. Nobody sees it. Nobody in HR would ever have insight to any of the data in marketing except for, produce reports. Same with HR. If you're in marketing, you probably don't know, what the forecast is for your headcount for the next 5 years. And what I mean by data silos, and especially in the context of financial services, is that there are fiefdoms in companies that guard this data. Mm. And what happens is these fiefdoms are really either it's by some regulatory requirement, or it just be that it just gotten out of control. Mm-hmm. But most data in most companies are not connected and they don't talk to each other. The big trend in big data, a few years ago was that we want to create these data lakes, so to speak, that you can just throw all your data into, run all these sophisticated things, and then data can just start talking to each other. But silo, that is what I mean by silos.
Yep.
Cool. So just kind of like, you want to kind of just give some little tactical things that at least I've done that kind of helped me get very, very comfortable in space. So, my journey, it can be very different from other people, but, this is the path I followed. So when I was in high school, I built PHP sites. So I'm pretty old now. So back when I was high school, Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, that was the way to build websites. And so what was really cool is that, I would build we had a forum that we can, log in, create a bulletin board, just friends, we can just talk about, whatever. But when you build it with, these really small apps, you learn about data really quickly. Every app has a data component. Whether it's a database or a model or a schema, every application has a database. When I was in college, I started, I worked at A&B as a contractor. I wrote a lot of Perl code and a lot of SQL Server, just data warehousing. So, you have, let's say at the time it was, hundreds of gigs of data. How do you manage that? How do you run reports? How do you automate transfer? How do you do ETL? There are tools today in what they call the data wrangling space that does a lot of this for you. But back in the day, you just kind of get hands-on and just figure it out yourself. My first data job after college was, I got more into using data to actually, solve problems. So it was Excel. Hadoop was getting really big as a distributed file system and as a distributed, compute. And then of course Python. So my first job was, the company asked me we had a whole ton of data about, how people were, reading reviews and buying, products. So really using data to optimize that. And today it's a lot, like this marketing analytics space is highly, highly sophisticated, but in the pioneering days, you had to do all this by hand. You had a lot of hypotheses, run a ton of different models, and then figure out like what are the attributes that attribute to more sales. And then you apply that, present it to the customer, and they would implement that, and that's how you keep optimizing. As a consultant, it really ranged. Some companies had data warehouses problems. Some had a lot of visualization. I typically focus a lot on the BI stacks as a consultant. So this is things like your Tableaus, your ClickViews, your SaaS platforms for analytics. And so, companies will have all this data, but, how do they make sense of it? How do they show it to people? How do they, make it all kind of seam together to tell a really compelling story? And so that was kind of my consulting in a nutshell. Obviously there are tons of weird projects sometimes, but generally speaking, that's what I focused on. And so when I moved into product management, all this kind of experience builds on itself. So when you're starting using these new technologies that you have today, right? So you have Spark, you have all these cloud services, you have, HTML5, you have, different web frameworks. It kind of builds on top of each other. And you start to kind of see how, even if you're writing, Apache, MySQL, PHP apps, you see how that actually can tie into, Amazon, web services that they offer. So most of the stuff I do today is obviously, when you create products today, especially, cloud-based products, everything is run as a service. So in my preview today, I focus on using a lot of these technologies to enable, the analytics that we want to do.
And I would say an interesting part about your career journey is there's data analytics is a kind of, it's really wide, right? Mm-hmm. So a business analyst versus a data scientist, like between them, there's gaps in terms of how deep they get. So on this list, I see like Spark goes all the way to data science level analysis, and then Excel and Tableau is like a business analyst type tool set.
Absolutely.
So what I would kind of speak to, because I saw the survey at the beginning of the class, we have some people coming from computer science, mm-hmm. some people outside. This is a good guide to kind of like, he's actually moved through both what you could like all the way from kind of data science level coding to business analyst, kind of more ad hoc reporting. So you can kind of look at this as a guide of, okay, if I have a computer science background and I still want to be on the coding heavy side of things, I'm going to go after Spark, Hadoop, Python. If I'm more of a business analyst and I'm maybe an econ major or even more on the statistics side, but don't want to go too deep and I want to interface more directly with the business, I would go with Tableau, Excel, what else here? SQL Server.
Yeah.
And then even maybe some Python. I mean, some business analysts, again, the title is not so fixed, but some business analysts are required to do some basic R and Python.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing to also note in this technology, as you can see, some of this goes back in the day. The technologies will always change, right? I mean, even the techniques and the process. But what's helped me big time is that, if you like this space and if you have the passion, whether it's coding, whether it's analyzing the business problems, or whether it's writing statistics, you always have to constantly keep learning and kind of hone your craft. Granted, I've been in different roles, but all of them have always been in this sort of like space of analytics. So just something to note, like the technology will change today. Today, Spark, Python is what people use to analyze big data. Tomorrow it's you have these AI models and these big machine learning models. That's constantly changing, and the more and more you devote yourself to some of these technologies and understanding how it works, you'll have so much more insight into this space.
And I want to say, we didn't tell him to say that. Our motto is 来自硅谷的终身学习平台, a lifelong learning platform. So
excellent.
He said that. He said that before we told him.
Yeah, no, I will disclaim I'm not getting paid to do this. It's just definitely volunteer to kind of help you guys.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one quick question I think is relevant for you. Is MBA really helpful for a software engineer trying to go into the senior manager position?
I would say, so that's a good question. Let me think about it just for a second. For me, it was absolutely helpful. And not to say, again, my situation was a little bit different and my choices were, or my preferences were a little bit different. It was very important for me to MBA. I was always a very, very good technical contributor. I always did that part very well. What I really didn't understand, and what MBA helped me, and I think today you don't have to get an MBA to do this, but I didn't understand how business worked. I didn't really know like how to manage, manage people, manage my just like my day to day. I really didn't even know how accounting worked. You'd be really surprised. Accounting is the most important subject for business. Like everyone thinks it's dry, but accounting is like really how you understand like the flow of a business, the structure of the business. By looking at someone's financial accounting statement, especially like publicly traded companies, you understand what their business is about. So for me, MBA was absolutely critical to addressing gaps in my knowledge. Would I recommend it to everybody? I don't know. I think it really depends on like if it makes sense for you at your time. If you feel like you have a lot of gaps, if you feel like you need the MBA, as a stepping stone to something you want to do. At the time, when I did it, it was obviously during the recession. I did it part-time. I never quit my full-time job. I did night classes at UT. UT offered a evening MBA program. I did it at night, and I would not trade that experience. Even the network I've created, I still talk to several of my business school friends. Some of them actually work at some of the same companies I've worked at. But to me, the understanding of how businesses worked and the technical side of business, so to speak, like the accounting, the financials, that was very, very, I couldn't even be where I am without really understanding that. So.
And last one here, how is your role different from analytics manager at other companies who might also be responsible for managing a data team to provide data solutions? So I'm not totally sure what the question was there. I guess so. At Volumetrics,
yep.
You were an analytics manager. Was that like a unique? Do you think? I'll rephrase it. Do you think analytics manager is a set title, or is it very different at different organizations?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think if I can maybe understand the question, you have applying analytics.
Mm-hmm.
Managing people like data scientists or analysts to like figure out insights and
Mm-hmm.
and grow sort of top side revenue of the business.
Mm-hmm.
And then you maybe have analytics solutions like, hey, I need to be able to do this analysis. I need to create new data sources, implement new tools,
build pipelines.
Yeah, build pipelines. Yeah. And I look at that as like sort of on the cost side of it, right? You need to enable
Mm-hmm.
this. You got to spend to kind of get the ability to do that. I would say analytics manager is very loaded. I mean, sometimes it's I've worked with analytics managers who are not necessarily very data savvy, but they're very good managers.
Mm-hmm.
So. If I can understand the question correctly, I think if you're an analytics manager and your team is very insights driven, it's probably a lot different mentality and focus than if you are a analytics manager managing, your infrastructure, your tools. I think it's a very, very different lens. The analytics manager, if you're for business side, I mean, you need to know, your customers. You need to know, how your company makes money. Can you optimize that? But if you're, building tools, and you need to know what do I need to build to enable new things? What are we trying to achieve as a company? So
actually, you use the accounting phrasing there too. So if you guys aren't familiar, like growing top line revenue means how are you using data to find new ways to earn profit and earn revenue versus I'm an HR person and I just want to know what our tenure and turnover is. So you're kind of, I don't want to say reactionary so much as like you're kind of doing an analysis of what has happened to support and optimize internal operations, or you're trying to figure out, you could do, what's the hot thing, like sentiment analysis on social media to decide who to sell to. So that's a big split in what you could be managing analytics wise. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, it's a very, very broad area. And it goes, you see there's no two, I think, are exactly the same. Yeah. So. Okay, so I'll move on. So I'll just kind of describe my kind of most memorable project. So I headed up the analytics and data for the headcount separation, basically for the largest divestiture in U.S. history. So what a divestiture is a company wants to spin off another company. They're a division or a unit of the company to be another company. So this was the largest one ever in the U.S. It was massive, massive. Both the companies would become Fortune 50 companies. They had over 300,000 employees globally. So, I took a team and we built this entire Python and SQL solution to manage thousands and thousands of data sources. So if you can imagine everything from your employee records to who needs to go where to how people get paid. And again, I will go very high level on this, but, it was a very, very huge scope and project. And what was most memorable about this project, I think for any other project I've done, is that, hey, if you don't do this correctly, people won't get paid, the company will get sued, it disrupts lives. And so, when you do projects in data, sometimes, you're just looking through stuff, you don't get like the, that full passion of what you're doing. But this one for me really always resonated. It was so impactful and there was so much at stake that if you didn't do this right, if we had bugs in our code or if our data was corrupted, people would would not get paid, and that's highly disruptive to their lives. Very successful. We were able to do it without incurring a lot of manual steps and a lot of errors in our data. We were very successful and able to do it, building this solution that actually is used today in some other separations. So I'm very, very proud of that project. So again, we kind of talked about this earlier, but I'll just kind of gloss over sort of like key stages in sort of my career. I learned programming and software as a hobbyist growing up. I was a nerd living in Texas, just loved this space. And in college I built database systems to store lots of data for AMD. You then kind of moved upstream and applied the data to drive business results. And then all the time utilizing background in different areas, software engineering, database systems, analytics, to consult with companies. Now I'm building products in this space, and so it's been a very interesting journey to get here. But the key takeaway is that if you want to be a product manager, especially product manager analytics, there is no one single path. In fact, in all the product management, there is no one single path. But regardless of what you do, it's really important to master your space. Understand what is valuable to your customers, and then translate the learnings from one area to another. And what I mean by that last point, I want to emphasize is that if you're writing code, great, you're writing code. But when you write code, you can translate some of the things you do in coding to, working with the customer. If the more you can kind of make these ties, right, in your mind between, what you're doing today and other areas, that's how you can become very successful, and you can provide new insights that the team may or may not have.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to think of an example of that. Like if you've done, like you did the headcount separation, that was you went really deep in a specific area.
That's
so now you're used to saying, okay, I've brought together 10 disparate systems to get to the point where I had all the metadata I needed to make a decision on a person. So like one system, I wasn't part of this project, but like let's say one system had the base employee record, one system had performance reviews, one system had all the transactions a salesperson was able to close. Right. Like once you get into the guts of that and learn it, the next time you need to do a big ETL project and manage that as a project manager level of bringing the systems together.
Absolutely.
You've learned the core piece of that. So it's not like you need to do a headcount separation project to get to the next level.
Yep.
It's just like learn the key skills in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that project, to add on, I pulled experience from software engineering. I pulled experience from, like data work, experience from managing projects. I mean, it's, you just pull from different places and pull it together sometimes.
Yeah.
So kind of pivot a little bit is kind of what I'm doing now. So I've always get these questions around like, building data analytics products, because it is a new space. And then, if you think about, kind of the areas where, companies are building new products, it's a lot of it is in data. So high level, as a PM, this is my belief, again, this is just my experience as a PM so far, is that you do need some industry, you have to bring something to the table, right? And, again, this is just kind of my general opinion of this, but, you have to have either some sort of industry or functional expertise. You have to either understand retail or understand HR or understand finance, but you do have to bring should bring some level of industry or functional expertise. Or you understand the customers, the users, and pain points. So think about if you're a PM for Facebook, you should understand why people are having trouble using the app, or why people even use the app, or why people will download it and try to talk to their friends or use the Messenger app. So you should bring either you are close to the customer or an understanding of how to get close to a customer. Or the third one, which I think is becoming probably less important in some areas, is technical expertise, which is why I got into this space. I had technical expertise over the other two. And that's how I got into it.
What would you say, like, of the kind of verticals you can come from? If you're a deep marketing guy, you could get there. Deep sales guy, software engineer, like you were engineering and VP engineering somewhere.
Yep.
What do you think are the 4 or 5 tracks that could get you?
Oh,
traditionally, I know there's tons of ways to do it, but
Good question. Good question.
Yeah, I'm going to put you on the spot.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I think if let's take a couple of examples. Let's say you're a sales guy and you want to go into product. You can come into it in two different ways. You can come in as that, like, hey, I understand how sales functions operate.
Yep.
And I know that there is something I can contribute. Like, let's say you want to work for Salesforce or Oracle, these companies that make these type of products. I have a lot of deep experience. I know this space, this function very well. Mm-hmm. Another side, you could also say, hey, I'm a sales guy. I understand the pain of how salespeople, like, I can't do my job. I just can't get around this, right? Mm-hmm. And I want to solve this problem. So that's another way. And I think if you go down the list of, whether you're in HR, you're a student, or if you're, a VP of engineering, this understanding of the problem and pain of any of these areas is absolutely the key. Every product manager's job should be to address those pains and to really understand how either the product you're creating would be used to address that pain. And then what you're competing against. Sometimes you're going to create a product. The competition you're competing is somebody doing nothing. Yeah. So you have to really understand that, and there's different ways to pivot depending on the type of products you want to work on. People ask because product manager has recently become like such a hot role. And I think most of our audience and students would come from the computer science perspective or analytics. Yeah. Analytics, I kind of see, because you're so close to customer data, right? So you're going to have a pulse on, okay, I've looked at customer data sets at 10 clients. Yep. I generally know how to approach customer data and use that to modify a product. So I kind of get the path from analytics. From pure software engineering, I just know how to build. Like, I know so I take, the customer gives me some abstract ask, and because I have the engineering mindset, I know what can profitably be developed. Yeah. So that's kind of how I see engineers coming from it. Yeah, no, that's a good call out. The notion of product manager, it's very different for every company, every role. You have some product managers that will never, they're writing specs at like what I call like the one pager layer. So I will write a spec that's very high level requirements, and somebody else will take that and kind of translate that into like the actual like implementation details. At Facebook and Google and some other companies in the Bay Area, that's how their product managers are organized. Product managers really don't, implement in that deeply. And so that's one model. The other one, to think about is like Microsoft is very different. Microsoft PMs tend to go pretty deep technically. So I typically will not just, I will be involved in these features pretty deeply, especially since our software is catered to a very specific user. But the kind of point is that if you're a software engineer and you want to go into product management, having an understanding of like how coding is done should usually help you. There are some people will make the argument that knowing too much about software will bias your view. But I always think like understanding how the limitations of software and the cost of things and what the trade-offs are absolutely critical, because you're constantly making these small decisions all the time, and they eventually add up to something big. So I think computer scientists and engineers who move into product typically have a little bit of advantage, because it's harder to learn that side, I think, and then learn the business side. Again, that's just my opinion. I tend to be more technical, so it's different on my end. One question I think is interesting. Do you feel there is a bubble in the big data and machine learning space? And where do you see big data taking us? Well, I don't know if it's bubble, but I definitely see there's a lot of marketing and discussions around it. I mean, let's take AI, for example. Yeah. And I won't go too, you can just quick answer off here. Yeah. But AI, if you really think, what is really AI, right? And everyone sees AI, they're like, oh, it's this new thing. Robot. It's like it's like fighting robots. Yeah, it's like Terminator, right? Arnold comes back at time and kills everyone. AI, really what AI is today, and most applications, if you see companies doing AI, is really just machine learning. All it is the same classical machine learning algorithms, but for some reason it's called AI. Not to say that like it won't evolve or it won't get better. It's really just doing machine learning at a much bigger scale than ever been done in the history of time. Things like big data and all this, really that's just there is a trend definitely that there's more data there's more data gets produced every day. So, the laws of physics change when you have certain sizes of data. When you go into the terabyte to the petabyte range, there are things you have to do. But I don't know if it's a bubble. Bubble would be, I think of a bubble like people are just spending crazily on these things, right? And then, they're getting no value from it. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but I do think there's a lot of marketing spiel and people selling products that may or may not have any real value.
So I will answer this one as well. I don't know, Sue, I don't know if you're based in mainland China. I saw a lot of people were tuning in from there. I was just back in like Zhongguancun area, and I visited a lot of VCs and a lot of startups in the Beijing tech scene. I do think there's a little bit of a bubble there, only because of the really a little bit looser funding market. So because China has a unique financial situation in that there aren't a lot of opportunities to invest in almost anything, right? Mm-hmm. All the houses are too expensive. It's hard to get money out of China, right? So a lot of people are going into venture capital because that's where there's growth. Yeah. So a lot of people I saw pitching, they say, it's AI plus. So I'm finance plus AI. Yeah. I'm this plus AI. So adding one machine learning algorithm to the back to give some recommendation. Yeah. Right. So to answer your question, I do think there is somewhat of a bubble. I saw it even more extreme in the Beijing scene just because of that unique financial situation. Yep. So if I would give you any advice, if you're looking to work for companies that are branding themselves as AI and staking your career on it, really grill them. Like if you go to interview, really say, okay, you say AI, but what is it? I mean, what value are you adding to the product by adding a few algorithms? Yeah, no, absolutely. There's actually a joke in Silicon Valley, like if you get a domain name and you put .ai at the end, you've increased your valuation by 15 or 20 million just by having that. So no, absolutely. I think from that lens, Mike, if you're a buyer, you definitely have to do your diligence and make sure that you have like legitimate use cases for these things. So, and then the last thing on this quick last thing on this side, how do you use analytics in PM? You obviously can be done in different ways using data. You have product metrics, your coder analysis, your A/B testing for when you have users in your product. Figuring out what telemetry is needed, and that could be things like how do you want to measure your site. There's obviously a lot of tools today that make this a little bit more seamless, but you still have to figure out what events you want to measure on your product if you're in a software product sense. And then of course mining unusual sources of data. Like the example I've heard is that a company wanted to sell more milkshakes, so they sent people to the store, and they watched people buy milkshakes and who they were and why were they buying it. They would ask them questions. So always try to find some unusual sources that helps us. That's a really good lens as a PM. The general kind of skills needed, again, this is probably gonna change in like 6 months, right? Because these are just of course like some of the tools I see a lot that are really kind of needed in different sort of buckets of categories of skills. From data storage, there's I think everyone should always, if you're going into data, you should definitely understand the difference between relational SQL data versus, NoSQL, object-oriented type of data. So this is like your Mongos versus your SQL servers. And of course, logs, log parsing, like companies like Splunk, that's a big growing field. Like everything is just dumped into logs, and there's tons and tons of data there. And from the compute and processing, there's your typical SQL queries, your Hadoop, which is the distributed computes, and then of course Spark, which is kind of now computes in memory. And then for sure there's more in that space as well. From the analytics side, Excel is typically still used for basic stuff. You got SPSS and SAS and R for your more statistical, and of course ML and the different packages and different techniques. Visualization, you have Tableau, ClickView, Power BI. It's a little shout out to Microsoft, and of course newcomers like Domo who are really moving BI into the cloud. And the last, probably most important for I think all of this is just your presentation and communication and project management. Just really understand the nuts and bolts of good project management and good communication, and then all the different ways and how it applies to your project.
And again, we mentioned this quite a bit, but managing that perception as stakeholder, whether you're a data analyst or product manager, a project manager, or a developer, is absolutely key to success. And this communication is the number one thing for that. So some thoughts about entry-level positions started. So Mike and I actually talked about this a little bit, and this idea of learning the guts of a business. So your first job may be something not that great. Like you may be doing like I'm gonna be an SAP analyst or an SAP integrator, or I'm gonna write software for I don't know HR to move data, blah blah blah, or something like that's just very very low level. But always think that like you're learning, like when you're at the lowest level of a business, you're kind of in the trenches of all the stuff that's going on. You can learn the guts of it very very quickly. I was a DBA in various roles at different companies, and when you even if you're just writing reports from somebody, you really understand like the lay of the land. And once you understand the guts of a business, that is a great learning experience as a business analyst or a DBA or reporting analyst. One of the thoughts is that find ways to drive real value. So you come in as an entry level. It's not always just like I want you to run this report and you just give me the data and I walk away. Look through the data, assess what they're looking for. People who ask for data typically are, they're very busy. They just want some data. Somebody asked them for it. But, take a step back and see, why do you want this data? What is important to you? And what can you get from it? And of course, scale these learnings to other areas. Transfer those skills. You learn about being a DBA. How can I help you, drive efficiency in another part of the business?
And I would add here, just because I think this is probably my favorite slide, because people underestimate it. Like everyone wants to be like an analytics manager or a product manager, but a lot of people then ask, wait, but how do I transition from a technical role to a manager role? You can learn a lot about how a business runs from a technical role. And I'll give an example. So I joined Deloitte. I wanted to be a high-flying management consultant doing really cool strategy projects where they pay you to say you should enter this market, or really cool strategy. And then what I ended up doing was deploying incentive compensation systems, which is really, on the surface, really dry. But while you're doing so, incentive compensation means if you're a salesperson and you sell this many products, how much should you get paid this month? So it sounds really dry, but I learned the details of 6 companies' compensation plans down to the transaction level. So then when you go and you want to do a sales strategy project, you could say, I know the detail down to the transaction calculation of how a sales team was paying their people. So just kind of like look for the learning opportunities for the business of also what Jeff talked about in MBA, right? So if you want to translate to business minded from technical, you can also find in technical roles, you're often automating something that comes from business strategy. So learn the business strategy of what you're executing, even if you're just the executor to start.
No, absolutely. And one last thing to add, strategy really comes down for a company to a couple of different things. And either they want to make something faster, they want to make something cheaper, or they want to have more customers. And being able to do that, it always comes down to technology. It always comes down to more data and technology. And so strategy really, it's what it boils down to. And the more you can learn about these lower level things, the better it makes you to realize when you do have those opportunities to define strategy.
Yeah.
And then some of the next steps, kind of what you can do today to get there. And I still even do some of these, and we kind of go through each. Build an app. So I still build apps. I have, in every year I build maybe 2 or 3. Today I'm using Node.js and Mongo as kind of my backend. Deploying in AWS and Heroku and different tools. But building an app it's not necessarily the app. It's you understand how like data flows. And the thing is that all data in a company, right, is always created from an application somewhere. It can be the finance app, or it can be like your Facebook, your Facebook app, or if you're all your contracts and billing software. Every piece of data is usually created by an app. So if you understand how apps are made, you understand how app stores data and what there's the pros and cons of certain designs of applications. So I would encourage you don't have to use PHP and MySQL, but I found this article is actually kind of interesting that you can build an entire CMS, which is a customer management system, in an afternoon using PHP and MySQL. tinker around with it, you start to really, the more you understand about, the software and these applications, the more you understand how data gets stored. Because ultimately, it just comes from these apps.
You're like Mark Zuckerberg stays sharp. He writes his own AI.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Mark, I don't know if you guys have followed this video, Zuckerberg has his own personal Jarvis in his house. Like he wrote it. He just side project, keep himself sharp. Awesome. I mean, and now it could be commercialized. It could have just been a nice science project.
And yeah, same. So I'm not a software, never studied formal. I took one class in college and then self-taught, but I've built a few full stack web apps and I didn't know what client server interaction was until I did it.
Yep.
You can't. And then if I ever wanted to be a product manager, if anyone here is coming from pure business background like I was, if you want the respect of an engineering team as a product manager, if you don't speak some of their language and kind of stay sharp on how new tools are interacting, it's hard to sort of have authority when you're giving requirements to a technical team unless you know how the basic pieces fit together.
No, absolutely. I think I didn't mention that as well. Is that, my engineering team would probably, you don't have to be technical and have to be an engineer, but you have to speak their language. And a lot of people say that as part of, you see it in blogs and stuff about that, but it's very true. I mean, engineers are the one who actually builds these things. Like you as a product manager or a project manager, you're just making most of your job is shielding them from all the noise. So you do have to be very, somewhat understand their world to be successful. So.
If you just come in with it, the worst thing is to be branded as just an empty MBA.
Exactly.
It's the worst.
Absolutely. And I know MBAs who are not technical, who are fantastic product folks. And it's just your mindset.
Yeah.
The other one around for data science, I'm sure people on the phone have heard about what a Kaggle competition is. So Kaggle will give you a data set, and the one I've done is the one around the Titanic. So predicting who would survive and die. So maybe that's not the right way. Who would survive and who would perish in the Titanic. So they had a list of all the attributes about a person, like they were female, they were in what class in the boat they were on, and basically like they had a competition whose model would be the best prediction. For example, a very simple model there is you can just predict if somebody was male or female. If you were just to classify, if you were male, they would survive, or you would perish, and you're female, you would survive. That model has a 70% or so accuracy just on that one attribute alone. And I think the best for that one was something like 98%. Like one team got like some 98% accuracy in their model of like who would survive on the Titanic. Netflix recommendation engine came from a Kaggle competition. They offered $1 million to a team that who can predict the best recommendation, based on their existing data would win it. And that's actually implemented, and that is the core of Netflix recommendation. And the last one is like, look through data, find insights, and create visuals. So there's a site called data.world that has thousands of publicly and user-generated data sets. So you can, go to the platform, download some of the data, play around with it in Excel, create charts. Another one is public Tableau. So if you go to, if you have Tableau license, if you're a student, you get it for free. So you get it for like 2 years. So even before you graduate, get the Tableau license. It's a great visualization tool. But get Tableau, play around with it. Publish them on public Tableau. They have contests. They have visuals of the day. It's kind of fun. I mean, that's one other area I think is if you want to if you want to be an analyst that drives customer value or drives revenue, playing around with data sets can really help hone your skills and pretty fast.
I like the data in terms of, a lot of people say, oh, it's kind of like chicken and egg. I can't get my foot in the door because I don't have any experience. And I don't have any experience because I can't get a job.
Yeah.
I particularly like the data projects that end in a visualization, because if you imagine the hiring manager or the recruiter who doesn't have a lot of time, quickly catching their eye with, oh, I linked to my GitHub or I linked to my portfolio with a visualization. Then they say, oh, I'm going to give this guy a shot on the phone. Then you can tell them about all the stuff that went on behind it. So it's a good way to get noticed.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I interviewed for the director of analytics at Volumetrics, that's what they did. They asked me a few behavioral stuff, but they gave me a massive data set, and they were like, "Hey, tell us what you think." And that was the interview. Like, and I built, the it's actually published on Public Tableau. This dashboard based on this fake data in our space, and all the the SQL and stuff in the back to actually make it happen. And that's what got me my position, was that just being able to demonstrate, hey, I can tell you what's going on in your business in 1, 2, 3 easy ways. Most companies will. If you go to an interview, they will give you a test in that way. Maybe they'll give it to you some data. Maybe they may ask you a few things, but the more you play around with data and get comfortable, the more that when you go interview and you get these positions, you'll be much more prepared. So I think that maybe the last slide that is I have. I think we have about 30 minutes and some time.
We can just kind of as long as if there's any. I'm answering one question. Someone's just asking me to type out the resources. So just to recap, so Tableau is a data visualization tool. You might need to have a U.S. university email, but if it's a .edu, it's fine. .edu. As long as you have a .edu email address, you can get a free 2-year license.
I think it's 1 or 2 years. I don't remember.
Enough to play with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you have a college email address, you should definitely just play around with Tableau. And Tableau has a lot of free learning resources on their website. So you can total self-service, just go and learn it on your own. Kaggle is a platform that releases both data sets and then it puts them into the framework of a competition. So usually they're sponsored by companies. So like Airbnb released booking data for the Los Angeles area and challenged people to, I forget what their challenge was, but it was like do like a heat map of like booking quality. Yep. So that one's a good one. Kaggle's particularly good because it's well known in the space. So you can say, I did this Kaggle competition and hit this rank, and it has brand recognition. And then data.world is a website that hosts free data sets you could put into your own project. So I would combine data.world with a Tableau visualization. Any other questions while we still have Jeff? One more. Oh yeah, I typed it in the chat. People are still asking for the resources. Sure. Here, I'll answer it in your question too. All right, anything else? All right, that's a perfect, one more. A general question, so philosophical here. What is your biggest challenge now as a product manager at Microsoft?
Biggest challenge, well, I think for at least our biggest challenge right now is that we're entering a market in our space in analytics that had really never been done, or it's a new up and coming sort of market, and this is in the world of people analytics. Mm-hmm. The challenge with people analytics, what I mean by people is like we want to apply data to human behavior. Mm-hmm. The challenge with people analytics versus, let's say, click analytics on your website. Yeah. Click analytics on your website is, it's just clicks. You're measuring very, very, very poignant transactions. When it comes to people, everyone has different motivations. Just because the data is saying like, Mike should be doing this or shouldn't be behaving this way, there is so many infinite amount of variables that can make Mike make a decision on something. Mm-hmm. So it's in our world, we're starting there, and it's also the greatest, one of our greatest difficulties, one of our greatest, we think it's like the greatest upside to this is that, if we can unlock, these variables that how people can, especially in their workplace, behave, we think there's like an endless possibility. Productivity gains is, if you can gain 1% in productivity in the U.S., it's, you're talking about the hundreds of billions of dollars of saving. When I mean productivity, I can do a little bit more with the same amount of time. And that's kind of what we are trying to unlock. It's our greatest problem, and it's the greatest challenge, but it's also what drives us in our space. Yeah,
no, that is an interesting space, and also it can be political, right? It's like I'm gonna make I forget. You guys started with email behavior analytics.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah. So volumetry started with calendar and email. So there are some things that you have to overcome in terms of barriers when you use any kind of data around people. Yeah. So it's interesting, right? In Microsoft, it's nice because if you think about most workers, especially in the world, use Microsoft products, and they can be upwards of even their entire day using Microsoft something. And so if that's the case, then that's kind of our vision, right? We want to use analytics. where knowledge workers are spending their time, and and it really help them become more efficient at what they do.
Yep. So the questions are now pouring in. People were thinking.
Uh-oh.
So how is a hardware product manager different from a software product manager?
That's very, very good question. So I work with, I have a lot of friends who are in the hardware space from my electrical engineering days. I think in hardware, you have to be a lot more technically savvy. I think in software, it's a lot more of that is like stakeholders management. You still need all this presentation and communication and whatever, but I think in hardware, you really need to know your space. Like you really need to know material science if you're building RAM or if you're building data centers. You really got to know, the physics and chemistry side of stuff more so than you need to know in software. So I would say that's the biggest difference is that you really got to know your stuff in hardware.
And if you want a view into the world of hardware product management, read what's his name, Andy Grove's book, the old CEO of Intel, High Output Management.
Yeah.
So he talks. It's a general management book. I'll write the book name down here. I'm sure it's translated too. It's very famous.
Yeah.
But he talks about like he literally wrote a textbook on material science.
Absolutely.
And it's just, if think of yourself as being like a manufacturing plant engineering manager, if you didn't know down to the actual hardware engineering, sure, you could be a great sales guy, but
absolutely.
it's just not gonna cut it.
Yeah, you will fail.
You will fail. Okay, I'll send that in a second. So next question, is an internship in business necessary for a graduate student to get a product management position?
No, I don't think that's, it certainly could help, but I don't think it's necessarily a prerequisite for getting into product management by any means.
Okay. The next one. So I'm embellishing a little bit because it was kind of simple. It's like, why did you change your jobs, and how do you answer it in the interview? So I'm kind of interpret that as like you've jumped around a little. Yes. Like, how do you explain your jumps?
It's really interesting. I've never really been asked that ever. I think, I've been most of the time I've never actually applied for a job. It's always been someone asked me if I'm interested. To be honest, I've never been asked that. So it was like, oh, you've only been here for 1 or 2 years, and why are you leaving? I'm trying to think of a time when I actually may have been applying directly. No, it's, the trend is definitely away from that, right? The trend is definitely like, I think employers, especially, in the tech space, really understand that you bring way more value if you have experience at different companies. I don't see how somebody who has, I have 10 years of experience, for example, at, tons of different companies. I think companies value that sort of diversity. If you work in one spot, not to say you can't be successful and, if you switch different roles within your company, but the more you learn about other things going on, the more you can collectively bring a set of experiences that a company just doesn't have. So I would say I've never been asked that, but I also feel like if somebody asks me that, I may ask you kind of question like, well, like what is the, if a company really values loyalty in that way, which is completely reasonable, then I may think, well, I can't commit to like 10 years here, so I don't think it's as big a deal as that people say.
And kind of, who's that? I think it was LinkedIn's original founder. He wrote this whole book on talent management, right? He's like, I'm going to look at campaigns with people. Realistically, let's stop lying to each other. Average 10 years, somewhere between 2 and 4 years in Silicon Valley. It's the same in China. Right? People don't work 30 years. There's no more lifers anymore.
Absolutely.
So it's like, if you're honest, and we interview people to join our startup, right? And you've interviewed people. I'm very honest with people. I say, look, what do you want to see on your resume after 2 years here? And let's be honest with each other. Can you get it here? And do you add business value while going on the growth path that you want?
Right.
If we have that deal, then you should come here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the way to explain it. So I can answer this related question. Is an internship necessary for a fresh graduate to be a product manager? And I'd say it's more than an internship. I think, I don't want to put a number to it, but I'd say minimum 8 years experience. Like we keep saying there's no set path, but in order to accumulate enough expertise in any area to be a good product manager, at least 5 to 8 years.
There are simply, like some companies who will take, fresh graduates and they'll kind of go through a program. Obviously Google, Facebook, the tech companies in the Bay Area do. But even like GE is a good example. GE has, in their engineering programs, like very, very set paths to be, like they call them like, I forgot what the name is, but, it's definitely possible. But to Mike's point, depending on the company and what, like what the products they offer, typically, you do need some depth.
Yeah. And the ones that I think the word, it kind of depends on the company. They might call you a product manager, but you're really supporting, you're like an assistant to the product manager.
Right.
So like maybe you're running the A/B testing analytics.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're part of the product manager org, but you're not in the sense, and like the role that Jeff has now, you're looking at more moving pieces than just one piece of analytics.
Absolutely. As you move up, and again, I'm in the learning process for this, but as you move up, you just have more and more responsibility. But yeah, definitely, starting out, you'll get probably smaller feature sets, smaller, scopes, and then you move up from there.
How are you on time?
Yeah, I think we're good. Yeah, I mean, okay. I think I bucketed to 8:30. So
okay, well, we'll make sure we finish in the next 10 minutes.
Yeah, no problem.
Only a few more.
No problem.
What is your biggest failure?
Biggest failure.
Putting you on the spot.
Wow.
So I'll make it cut. So I do some classes on behavioral interview questions. And this is always, I don't think people ask this as directly.
Yeah.
They'll kind of like ask around it.
Yeah.
But the point is always, can this person admit failure and did they learn from their mistake?
Yeah.
It's like kind of
absolutely.
So I don't know. What's your go-to?
Wow, biggest failure. I would say, like, from a professional standpoint, trying to think of this and try to say it without like making it sound like an interview.
I know. You can give us I think it's helpful for people to hear an interview because I have my Deloitte failure.
Yeah.
So like
I'll go back to Deloitte because obviously like I have my present job. There's a lot of micro failures in terms of like things, but I think at Deloitte the one that always stood out for me was we had this project. It was for a company in New York, and we were just. It was just we did nothing. We delivered nothing for them. It was so out of scope. We were just spinning our wheels. We didn't have our stuff together. The one that it really bothered me because we tried really hard, but we could never deliver anything for them. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, it was a horrible experience for everybody, even for our customer and client, because they were like, "Well, we spent $1 million. Like, what do we got for it?" And we were literally had nothing, and that was. Such a huge disappointment. I mean, if you're a consultant, you can walk away from these things and be fine. It's not like going to kill you. But when you think about like, hey, this company spent $1 million. It's not like this is they have shareholders, right? It's someone's budget. It's not. It's very demotivating, right? And for me, it's personally, I feel bad, right, that we did this to this company. So that was probably the biggest failure, was just not living up to the expectation that we were brought in to do. And that was that so reflected poorly on all of us.
Is there anything you would do different approaching a similar engagement, or was it kind of doomed to fail?
I think, the challenge sometimes in consulting is that, sometimes you don't have a choice. Sometimes you're like, look, I need help. Can you just come help us? And you go into these situations where it's all kind of messed up. I think for me, I would, if I could have controlled this, I wouldn't have sold the project to the company. But, obviously don't have that all the time. So that's just me. I mean, like I have a little bit of an ethical kind of boundary of wasting people's money. So, I probably wouldn't have done it if I knew that was the case. And
I'm not going to go through my whole failure story, but it's about overselling too.
Yeah.
So like I was a young analyst, and you never want to say no to work. You always say, "Oh, hey Mike, can you do this?" Of course. Yep. Can you handle this? Yeah, of course. And then I couldn't, right? Yep. And then I missed my deadlines. So like, if anyone here is listening for coaching on how to go through your failure story, is always have like the silver lining of, and now I never made that mistake again.
Yeah.
And so for me, I call it like the buzzword is managing up. It's like, no, I can't do it. Like you need to have boundaries, because it's better to have like a small failure of not being able to do everything than it is to totally blow up your project and take on too much. Okay, there's a lot of questions that are coming in spurts. What's a key capability to get into the financial analytics field?
Financial, I mean, obviously the core things that we talked about. I think depending on what you mean by financial analyst, there's there is like doing finance at a company, right? So if you do that, of course, then you need to know. Is that the question? Sorry.
It's that was the whole question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
If you're doing like finance at like, let's say any company, yeah, you need to know like accounting, right? You need to know, revenue, costs, GAAP. These things will help you as a financial analyst because most of the time you'll be running reports, usually for the CFO.
Mm-hmm.
If you're trying to get into like financial services, I don't think necessarily, any one particular thing. I think what helped me, at least in financial services, was, understanding, understanding like regulatory impacts. Like if you work for a bank, banks have so many rules about data around customers. If you love banking and you want to, let's say you live in New York and you want to work in that sector, you're really good to understand like some of the compliance stuff around data. It's very, very strict compared to other places.
Yeah. So but I don't think in terms of technical skill set, I don't think it changes that much.
No, absolutely.
Financial institutions may have an older stack.
Yeah.
So like you might need to be like, okay, you're going to work on Mongo databases at a venture funded startup and you're going to be doing SQL Server at banks, but that's not like you're not like a totally different
or even worse, like a lot of banks still run on mainframes.
Oh yeah, so, like terminal stuff.
Yeah. So you still have, some of that.
Yeah,
sure.
but I don't think it's like you need to study a different degree.
No,
okay, so let's pick some. This is kind of interesting. Is it okay to tell interviewers that you want to be an entrepreneur one day or start your own tech company? And I think on the flip side, you could even say want to join a startup eventually.
Mm-hmm. I think if they ask you and if that's really what you want to do, answer truthfully. I mean, if somebody asks me like, Jeff, what is your life dream? And if I said, I want to start a business someday, I don't think that's bad. I mean, if that's really what you want, I think you shouldn't say that to get the job. You should not say it if you think they're not going to give you the job because of that. I think sometimes you have to be pretty honest with yourself on these things. Again, different motivations. If you really want the job and you feel like they wouldn't respond to that, that's your own decision. But I don't think it's bad. I mean, I think again, it depends on all this stuff's like caveats.
It's really subjective.
It's very subjective. But I wouldn't go and be like, I'm going to leave your company in 2 years. I'm going to go do my own thing.
Yeah.
You should always bucket, like when people ask you that, like, what do I want to see? What do you see yourself in 5 years? You may not say entrepreneur, but you may say something like, I want to run my own team, or I want to run my own project.
Exactly.
You may not just say I'm going to quit in 2 years and I'm going to take whatever I learned here and start my own company. That may not be the right way to phrase it.
You have to judge. So personal factors are how many opportunities do you have? Are there 3 companies fighting over you right now, or are you desperate to find a job?
Yeah.
If you're desperate to find a job, you should be as political and polite as possible about staying there longer. If you have leverage, then I would pick a company that understands that concept I was just talking about of I'm going to be here for 2 years and then reevaluate kind of thing. So I always I don't want to give a blanket answer because everyone's in different situations. If you really need to just get a job and get it done, then pitch yourself as, as stable an employee as possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let's see. We did that one. What does your typical day or week look like? I think a lot of people like to hear this.
Well, I have a really crazy schedule. So Mondays for me, I go to our office in San Francisco. Mondays is pretty, let me take one step back. So we are 2-week sprint cycles, right? So I'll talk about week 1 versus week 2 of the sprint. So week 1 of the first week of the sprint, engineering starting to work, they're going to create their design. So I usually spend Mondays in our SF office just kind of catching up with stuff, kind of planning out what I need to deliver for the next, in our case, in the next couple of sprints, because we have a black backlog now. So Mondays I usually go to SF and kind of work on the next, work on future stuff. We'll have some calls with customers or stakeholders. But generally speaking, that's how first week Monday starts. I travel a lot for work, so I usually fly out Tuesday mornings and then spend 2 or 3 days with our engineering team and come back Thursdays. And then Fridays I usually work at home, and sometimes I go to SF. Week 2 of the sprints is when things are starting to wrap up. I actually handle a lot of our acceptance testings for certain features. So I'll start to right now we don't have a lot of bodies, so I actually will just do it myself in some cases. Start to play around with what developers have built, make sure everything is working as it's supposed to, and then open up new bugs and things like that. So second week is really just kind of finishing up the sprint, and then we do sprint planning for the next sprint, and then we kind of start the process over and over again. And then periodically, of course, we'll release the software and then get more feedback. But that's generally my day. It's Tuesday to Wednesday, Thursday traveling, Monday and Fridays working at home or in San Francisco.
So beyond kind of like location and stuff, what's like a typical split of the type of people you have to interface with?
Yeah. It's funny because we have data about ourselves in this way, like who we interact with. I typically spend, right now, because we're in execution mode, marching to our ship date, I spend probably 60-70% of my time with engineering, about 20 to 30% of our time with our stakeholders, the customers, and then usually about 10% with our leadership team to make sure things are working. That's how we split now, but it definitely changes. When we started the project, it was almost more on the customer side, because we need, as the PM, you got to put in your product manager hat and figure out, the things that you have to build. Right now, we've pivoted to a lot more execution. We know what we want to build, and now it's kind of driving engineering to complete that.
I'm just answering one quickly for you.
Oh, no problem.
Someone said, "Why did you join Microsoft?" And I'm saying, you didn't. You were in a
I
company
was
that got
assimilated into the Borg.
Yeah. So this one answered live.
But I like Microsoft. It's a great company.
Okay. I apologize, guys. We're not going to have time for all of them. A bunch are coming in. Did you earn lots of SPG points? Yes.
Yes, lots. I have actually lifetime gold.
Lifetime gold.
Lifetime
I didn't
gold.
make it. Okay.
Yep.
So what made your colleagues with no technical background that became PMs really successful?
Again, I look at them and like they have such high emotional awareness, and they have this deep sense of this desire to learn. They just want to know about this stuff. They're curious. They ask great questions. Great communicators. It's like they have a good framework for themselves, right? They know that they don't know something, and they know how to address that gap. And that's what makes it great. They just have very, very disciplined about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like people always ask for more specific. It's kind of hard to give specific example on the emotional intelligence. I think a big piece of it is being an open listener.
Absolutely.
It's like a lot of people come in with, I'm going to use American idiom, but like chip on their shoulder means very strong personality and ego, and they're not prepared to be open to feedback.
Absolutely.
So a lot of people with the best people skills.
Yep.
For example, okay, I'm not an engineering expert, but when engineering is really consistently complaining about some problem in the process, I go and listen to them and really have an open door. And those people tend to be more successful.
Absolutely. And if you think about it, if you're not hyper technical, you're not going to suggest anything. You really by default only can listen. And that helps you big time. Definitely listening is another, we didn't talk about listening enough, but it's so crucial in these roles.
And active listening, not someone described, you're not thinking about the next thing you're going to say. You're thinking about what they're saying. So there's a split there. All right, let's do one more here. How many years do you generally work for a position, for example, consulting companies? I think I'll answer this one quick. Consulting projects range really widely. If it's a huge project, it could be over a year. Small projects could only be a month, or it really is that full range. It could be multiple years to 1 month. So let's answer that. This one's interesting. How do you speak with C-level executives, and how do you train yourself to speak to them effectively?
Really, because God is just tons of preparation. I deliver, sessions with, CEO of smaller companies and definitely CFOs of certain other companies, just due to the nature of analytics and consulting. I would say the number one is preparation, and that's what actually consulting teaches you. Consulting did a lot of bad rap, but really what it teaches you is that this notion of client presence. So when you see a team let's say from consultants come in, typically if they're good, they're really well polished. It looks like it's very seamless. But what happens behind the scene, and Mike, you'll know this, you could attest to this. You're just prepping all the time. I mean, I remember the first time I presented to a C-level. I mean, I spent several days just prepping the presentation, making sure everything flowed right, getting input. So it's just you just got to you roll your sleeves up and put your effort. There is no silver bullet. There's nobody who is just naturally going to just kill it, right? Everyone prepares because you don't have a lot of time with these folks, and it can make or break what you're trying to do. And
I think of it in some practical terms. There is no silver bullet, but think of if you're looking at a big company as a decision-making machine, right? The C-level executives have panels of experts that they get small time slots with. So I'm the CFO. I've got teams of analysts and consultants and accountants that all get one 20-minute chunk of my day.
Absolutely.
Right. So you have to imagine, as you go to communicate with that person, you're bubbling up information. You're in the trenches. You see everything. So you spent 20 hours looking at this data. What does that C-level executive need to know in 20 minutes?
Yeah.
That's the hardest part.
Yeah.
And that you might spend 5 hours just distilling the data into something that tells a story and actually makes an impact to them, because you're acting as like a filter of data to give them only the most important piece.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, closing one, and then we're out of here. What do you think the next step will be in your career?
Oh, that's a good question. Hopefully one of these apps I kind of create on the side, maybe I could just turn that to like a, sell that and retire. But that dream aside, that's a good question. I love the product space. I think I finally, I feel like my career has been very experimental. I tried, I love analytics and data, so it's always been this core tenet. Mm-hmm. But I've done a lot of different things. I don't see myself necessarily doing one thing forever. That's just who I am. But I love product. I think I love like the challenge. It is such a different problem to solve than just running data or technical challenges. It's a lot more than just anything I've ever done. So for me, like I think I'm going to stay in this space. At least maybe it's more technical in product, or maybe it's like more high level with customers and product. But I tend to see myself in this kind of space. It marries a lot of like stuff in business and strategy with tech, which is always really fun.
Yeah, cool. All right. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate everyone's time.
Yeah, thanks for your questions, everyone. I apologize. There were a few left, but I want to make sure we get out. Oh, the recommended book I'll answer by text here. It's called High Output Management, and it's by the former CEO of Intel, Andy Grove, pretty legendary Silicon Valley guy. I just answered it. Check the text of the question. I answered it. High Output Management by Andy Grove. All right, guys. Thank you very much. And look forward to the next talk.